I worked in health and wellness, so I did a lot of interviews with doctors. We're very busy, and all of a sudden had to leave. Then we lost our subject for, 2 hours, and we had to wait. So really, the lists were a way to keep on track, and I started using them in my everyday life, specifically when I was looking for an apartment with my husband. We were looking for a new apartment in New York City. You would leave and be so overwhelmed and only remember that there was a wine fridge, which was like, well, we should move there, So I made a checklist like I would when I would go out on a shoot to interview someone. Here's all the questions I want to ask. Here's all the things that I want to make sure. Is the subway nearby? Literally, how many closets are there? And the realtor had said to me, can I make a copy of this list? Nobody knows what to ask. And I said, really? I said, sure. And I remember going back to my office and talking to some of my producer friends. They're like, people don't think in this way. They're not making checklists for everyday life. They're not really thinking through the distractions that might pop up or the things that might happen like you do in television production because you've lived through it. And I said, and that's how my blog started.
Welcome to Leadership, the podcast where leadership meets real-world insights. In each episode, you can eavesdrop on exclusive conversations with top thought leaders, best-selling authors, and experts in leadership, communication, relationships, culture, and everything else that shapes your effectiveness in the workplace and in your personal life. Leadership is here for you. Now, here's our host, himself a seasoned coach and best-selling author, Dr. Roger Dean Duncan.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Leadership, the podcast where we explore the mindset, skills, and strategies that leaders need to grow influence that truly matters. In today's world, many leaders are finding it more challenging than ever to juggle priorities, show up for the people who depend on them, and manage their own development and brand in ways that boost their value in the marketplace. Paula Rizzo is my guest for this episode, and she has a lot to say about all of that. First, some background. Paula was sitting at her desk at Fox News Channel in New York City when she felt a dull pain below her navel. Like many hard-charging people might do, she ignored it. After all, she was busy. She had a demanding job as a senior TV producer. She had obligations as a wife, daughter, and friend. She had no time for a stomachache. 2 days later, she was in the hospital emergency room. Her appendix had burst, spreading bacteria like a toxic cluster bomb. She could have died. Fortunately, rather than killing her, the episode inspired Paula to rethink her priorities. During her recuperation, she took everything off her plate. The unscheduled outage gave her a fresh perspective on how to take charge of life. A year before that appendix incident, Paula had published her first book. It's titled Listful Thinking, Using Lists to Be More Productive, Highly Successful, and Less Stressed. The irony makes me smile. Paula is now taking her own advice in seeking a less stressful life. Today, she's a sought-after media trainer and strategist, a Writer's Digest columnist, a popular LinkedIn trainer, and a full-fledged advocate for living a calm and well-organized lifestyle. Her follow-up book is titled Listful Living, a list-making journey to a less stressed you. Paula is a delightful lady, and I've been looking forward to this conversation because I know it's going to be content-rich. Paula Rizzo, welcome to Leadership.
Wow, you have done your homework, sir. But we've known each other for quite a while. Thank you for having me. Yeah,
we have. Well, I've been looking forward to this. Now, let's start with this. What originally drew you to lists as a productivity and stress management tool?
Well, I first started using it as a television producer because there was literally no way to get my job done without them. And I didn't really use them in other parts of my life. And then I noticed that things were falling through the cracks, strangely enough. And so then I started to use it to get things done. And after that incident, as you mentioned, which was now, 10 years ago, that was in 2016 that my appendix burst, I started to look at those lists a little differently.
So how does listful thinking differ from traditional to-do lists? It's clearly a mindset.
Definitely. It's more than just a to-do list, which I love. I love my to-do lists, of course, but it is really about setting intentions, goals, because that really is what a to-do list is. You know, it really is.
Sure.
What do you hope to do by the end of the day?
And you get endorphins every time you check something off.
It's the best. You know, I write down things that were not on the list that I did just so I can cross them off.
I've done the same thing. It must be some sort of condition.
You got to do it. You know, it really helps. It really helps. So yeah, I started to see more, especially in the television world, we used a lot of checklists to get things right.
Sure.
You know, to make sure right before we went on air, did everybody, was the microphone on? Is the camera in focus? You know, little things that you think, of course, you would know that. But when distractions happen and life is fast, you don't notice those things. And I started to do some research as a journalist, and I was very interested to find that doctors do these lists and checklists in ORs to make sure things run smoothly. Pilots do this in the air, thankfully, to get us from A to B very safely. Construction.
It's life and death.
Exactly. And that's the thing. Our lists typically are not, but they're just as important to have what is necessary, what is needed. And now for me, it's really what's most aligned to be on that list.
So what seems to be the biggest misconception that people have about productivity?
Oh, they think they have to have the perfect notebook and the perfect pen. I can't tell you how many times I've answered that question where people say, well, what notebook are you using? And I say, it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
It does not matter. It's not, you know, a fancy new app or this. I still do it by hand. I do sometimes use apps too, here and there, but it really truly is whatever works for you. And that is the answer no one wants to hear because nobody wants to figure it out on their own. They want the quick answer. And, you know, I always say, give something 2 weeks. And whatever method that is, use it for 2 weeks. And if it sticks, do another 2 weeks and keep going. And if you don't like it after 2 weeks, switch, do something different.
Sure. It's like reading a book. Once you start, you're not obligated to finish it. If you don't like it, it's not working for you, put it down. There are other books.
I have recently come to that realization. I used to feel bad, you know, as an author and say, well, I should read it.
Kind of guilty if you
I
put
was
it down.
guilty, yes. But now what I do is I read the last chapter. And I think, you know, now I kind of know how it ended. I feel okay. I've given it some closure.
Well, tell us more about how your background in television production influenced your approach to lists. Of course, you needed to keep track of equipment, but there's always the people issue. So how do lists help with that?
It was very much about how to control distraction as well, you know, because I was working at the time, you know, I've worked in live television for a long time and then taped and all of that. But, you know, people are a variable. The best laid plans are then
Yeah, for sure.
kind of taken off route by whoever decides to show up that day, you know, or I'd be doing an interview. Let's say I worked in health and wellness. So I did a lot of interviews with doctors who were very busy and all of a sudden had to leave and had to go, you know, do some surgery or do something in the moment. And we lost our subject for, you know, 2 hours and we had to wait, you know, so it really, the lists were a way to keep on track. And I started using them in my everyday life, specifically when I was looking for an apartment with my husband. We were looking for a new apartment in New York City. And it was very overwhelming and we didn't know what we were looking at. You know, you would leave and be so overwhelmed and only remember that there was a wine fridge, which was like, well, we should move there, you know. Yeah. So I made a checklist like I would when I would go out on a shoot to interview someone. Here's all the questions I want to ask. Here's all the things that I want to make sure. Is the subway nearby? How many closets are there? You know,
sure.
A lot of space is small in New York. You know, you want to make sure your stuff fits in there. And the realtor had said to me, can I make a copy of this list? Nobody knows what to ask. Nobody know. And I said, really? I said, sure, you know. And I remember going back to my office and talking to some of my producer friends. They're like, you know, people don't think in this way. They're not making checklists for everyday life. They're not really thinking through, you know, the distractions that might pop up or the things that might happen like you do in television production because you've lived through it. And I said, and that's how my blog started.
Yeah. So when everything feels important, and that's a common malady, when everything feels important, how do you recommend prioritizing?
I like to make daily lists because then that way I can see what's right in front of me, what is needed in the today, what has to happen today. And I make my list the night before. It's something I've done even since I was in television. And it's sort of my shutdown strategy for the day. It's the what is tomorrow? What brings, what is coming tomorrow? What is my best intention? And so really looking at it that way, I think helps to be able to prioritize to say what has to get done today or what can be pushed to the next day. And it really is being realistic because a lot of times those timelines or that feeling of guilt or whatever, those are all self-imposed. It's not actually true. You don't have to have that thing done tomorrow. It's actually, you have another week or whatever it is. But I think writing it down and the act of getting it out of your head, putting it down on paper really does help to lessen the overwhelm as well, because it feels like, oh my gosh, everything has to get done tomorrow. And then when you put it down on paper, it's like, actually not true.
Right. I think one advantage of doing it the night before is that the next morning you can hit the ground running. You don't spend the first however much time going through your list.
Totally. And I mean, that's the people problem again. People will creep into your day with emails or phone calls or showing up if you're in an office at your desk and have other things that they would like for you to do or questions for you. And then you lose track of what your intention was for the day if you don't have that guideline and that list right there to sort of bring you back. So I like to look at it as sort of my anchor throughout the day.
I don't know about you, but I've discovered that no matter what I do, I have only 24 hours a day. Can't
Isn't
stretch
it so
it.
interesting?
Got to make the most of it. So how can list making help people set and maintain boundaries?
Yes, it's important because, as you said, everything sort of feels like a priority and everybody wants their thing done first. But really being able to understand what you have the time, the capacity to do in a day is so important. And I think lists, getting into this mode of, okay, how much did it, it's not about like how many things did I check off the list. It really is about how much time and capacity do I have to do these things so that I can really say, I can do that today. I know it's going to take me 5 minutes versus I know that thing is not going to take me 5 minutes. It's going to take me 2 hours. I don't have 2 hours today. So I need to be able to say, I can do that, but on this time, maybe next week or whatever it is. So really understanding how the list can work best for you and knowing what's on there, right? If something else pops up, it's like, my day is full. I have a lot of things today, or I do have the space.
Sure. So how do lists help reduce decision fatigue? You haven't used that term, but seems to me that's kind of what you're talking about, because we need to make decisions in the moment of where we're going to invest our attention and our time and our other resources.
Yeah.
And that fluctuates throughout the day.
Definitely. And, to-do lists help for sure. But for me, I make lots of different lists. And I do have lists of, restaurants that I like to go to for lunch. Let's say if I'm going to meet somebody, here's 5 restaurants that I know I like the menu at, and it's in between this place and this place. It's easy for people to get to or whatever it is, those types of things too are helpful. And this I had learned, I remember I had a roommate in college who used to write a list of all the foods that she liked for snacks. And I thought, don't you know what you like and what you don't like? This seems ridiculous. But later on, I was like, you know what? It was actually really smart because she would go back to the list and it was a list of healthy food. And instead of grabbing chips or something that was easy, she would sort of stop herself, look at the list, and then choose from that. And so it kind of made life for her easier. And I thought, you know what? Okay, maybe it wasn't so crazy.
We have a lot of spreadsheets and lists around our house.
Ooh, yeah.
And I find it very, very helpful. So how do you avoid list overwhelm?
Yes, because this is what happens to many people. They make many lists and they put them all over the place and they lose them or they don't use them. I'm very purposeful about where I put my lists and when I use them. So having that method of doing it the night before, and then I always keep it in the same place. I did this also when I worked in television. I always had, the one central notebook that I had, and I would go through and I would say, okay, what do I have the time and the resources to do? And if I don't have the time and the resources to do that thing, it does not go on the list. So too often people are putting too many things on the list that you'll never get to. And there are also things on there that you'll never do in one day, like write book. That's not going to happen. So we need to have micro things that you put on there, right?
Sure.
What is the one step towards writing the book that you can put on the to-do list?
So I understand you are a fan of, or at least you prefer, handwritten lists over some sort of digital app.
I do both. So my personal to-do list is written down. And I actually use now like a digital tablet to write it. So I'm still writing it by hand, but it's not on paper anymore because I went through so many notebooks and then I felt bad about throwing them out. And then I was like,
And if you lost it, it would ruin your day.
It's a whole thing. So I do use a physical, writing technique for my personal list. And then I use an app called Asana for all of my work and, those types of things to keep track of the long term. Because otherwise, like, I can't write that list. If something is, I have an article, let's say, that's due, or a video that I'm working on that's not due for 2 months or something, I want to be able to keep track of that and give myself deadlines. And I can do that in the app. And that's really helpful. But then I'm always looking at the app and saying, okay, what are the things that are coming up? And then adding those items to my personal to-do list.
Do you remember the old Franklin planners?
Of course, yes.
And they were big. Many years ago, my wife went to a chiropractor. She was having back and neck issues. And he examined her and talked to her, and they looked over on the table, and she had her Franklin planner. Mm-hmm. I mean, it was big. And he said, "Do you carry that around all the time?" She said, "Yeah." He said, "Stop carrying that around all the time, and I won't be seeing you so often."
Here's our problem, right?
It literally, her list was overwhelming.
Wow. Physically, right, exactly. Her whole self was just being overtaken by this list. Amazing. Wow.
So, Paula, what is your advice for people who hate making lists? And there are some people who just don't like to do it.
There are. They have made themselves known to me through the years.
I'm sure.
Hey, look, if it doesn't work for you, it doesn't work for you. I'm never going to tell you to become a morning person if you're not a morning person. But what I will say is that if you can make a list and free up some brain space to not have to remember something, why not try it?
Yeah, free up some brain space. That's a great way to put it. Mm-hmm. That is really part of what it does. Let's pursue that a little bit. So how do lists support mental clarity and emotional health? What have you observed?
Well, I have made many lists, obviously, but also when I'm having difficulty and in any way, right? Since I think sort of in these short list forms, it's helpful for me if I'm going through something to make a list of feelings that I have, let's say, about a certain situation. It's almost like journaling in a way, right? And just getting it out of my head so I'm not holding it. I think that is the biggest thing. Putting all the things that you think you need to do down on paper and realizing, okay, well, there's not that much. I kind of made it a bigger deal in my head. So I think for those types of things, to just sort of do that big mind dump, whether it's, an emotional thing you're going through or, hey, I have a lot of things I need to get done, just getting it out of your own head, putting it down, and then making it more manageable from there, creating a list from that master list is really helpful.
For me, the physical act of writing with a pen a list helps me think through the steps involved in a particular task. Mm-hmm. And that prepares me for how I'm going to allocate my resource of time and attention. There's just something about writing it down that seems to help.
Yeah, and there's been studies done that you're 33% more likely to do something if you write it down.
Yeah, well, I'm 37%.
Clearly, very advanced. Yes.
Yeah. So how can people use lists to set boundaries and help them know when and how to say no?
Yes, it is difficult to do that. I mean, I think a lot of times people want to be the hero. They want to say yes. They want to be able to, show up and help people. And sometimes you just cannot. And I think understanding what's on your list, what's coming up, what you have the capacity to do is really important. But also sort of having a list, let's just say, of things that you say to people when they ask you to do something that you don't want to do, can't do, is really helpful. And being very simple and plain about it is what I've found has been the most helpful. Thanks so much for asking, but I won't be able to do it. Please keep me in mind for next time. I can't do it now, but I can do it 2 weeks or whatever it is.
Sure. And that kind of mindset can be very important in the workplace if, say, a supervisor is asking you to do something and your plate is already full.
Sure.
And you want to be responsible, you want to be responsive. There are ways tactfully and professionally to say, I'd be happy to do that. Here are 3 other things that I'm scheduled to do. Which of those would you like for me to move aside to do this?
Totally.
And then get the supervisor involved in thinking through that.
It's a great point. Yeah, having it be a co-creation, in
Sure.
a way. And that's one of the things, though, too, that I learned from having my appendix burst, unfortunately. And most people do not have their appendix burst because they go to the hospital and it's a simple procedure and it's no big deal. And they leave the hospital in 2 days and they're fine.
And you were covering health and wellness, so that's the great irony of it all.
Isn't it? Isn't it just amazing, right? Like the universe was like, you really need to hear this message. You're not getting it.
Yeah.
And so, but I really did learn, everything had to come off my plate, right? Everything that I had on the list. And guess what? The world spun.
Life went on.
Unbelievably. I was like, wow, what an ego hit. Like it wasn't all about me, And I think that was such an important lesson, is that it doesn't always have to be you who does the thing. It doesn't always, have to be in that moment. There were things that then, I did 6 months later and it was still just as great.
Sure.
Your change initiative has the budget. The strategy looks solid, and everyone's nodding along in the meetings. But for some reason, it's going nowhere. Dr. Roger Dean Duncan knows why. After 40 years in the trenches with top business leaders, he knows that change fails when organizations lack the right foundations: trust, accountability, and real communication. Dr. Duncan's free 10-minute assessment shows you exactly where your organization stands. Answer a few straightforward questions that reveal your true change readiness level. Don't waste months discovering the hard way. Get your free assessment today at leadershop.net/change. Again, that's leadershop.net/change.
Well, let's shift gears a little bit here. What motivated you to transition from TV production to media consulting?
I always wanted to be my own boss. And I thought, I would be so good at having, free reign of my schedule. Let me do whatever I want with my time. I would love that. And so I think that was the first thing. And I've been in television for a long time, close to 20 years, and it's a grind. It's a lot. You're doing homework basically every day. You have to know everything that's going on in the world. It's a lot of stress. And I had seen, from thankfully doing health and wellness news, I was understanding there are better ways out there. And what I wanted to do really was to be able to help people who I had seen so many experts and so many authors pitch me as a producer and come, through my office that were not ready for media. And I had to just say no and move on. And I couldn't help them. And there was nothing I could do because my job was just to get a great guest, get a great segment, and move on. Too fast. But that was a missed opportunity. Those people may have had a great book or a great idea, and it was lost because they couldn't do media. They didn't know how to do this. So I thought, it broke my heart to have to say no to something like that. And I thought, there are ways that I can definitely help. And so that's been what I've done. I've worked with leaders and CEOs and a lot of authors to be able to help them to really succinctly talk about what they know in a way that's powerful so people remember it and they buy the book and lives are changed. I mean, that's the whole point. I've always thought of, media as a public service to be able to really tell you something that will change your life for good or for bad, but it really truly will do that. And for authors especially, you have to be your book's best advocate. And I knew that from having my own book and understanding how hard it is to sell even one book.
So how has the current media landscape changed the way leaders need to communicate?
It's really interesting because I had started my business before COVID started. And so I had been using Zoom before anybody even knew what Zoom was. I was doing all of my trainings on Zoom and remotely. And I remember all of my clients came back to me and they said, we're so glad you made us use Zoom because now we're like all set, But that's what changed. It changed because COVID then changed how people were communicating. They needed to be on camera. They needed to be able to articulate a message to a camera that people were not used to. They wanted to be in the room with someone and they just couldn't get their message across. And so I started doing a lot of trainings for sales teams and for, people doing interviews for jobs. And, all these, it kind of opened things up in a different way because video had only really been something that the media was using, really, and now anybody could be live at any time. We could live stream this right now and people could be watching us anywhere in the world. That was never available. That was only for television stations. So now the access that we have, anyone should be their own producer. And that's what I've always been bullish on for my clients is to say, you don't have to wait for the media to say, oh yes, we think you're good enough to be on camera and come in for our show. You can just do your own thing now, right? And then use that to pitch media and to do other things.
Right. So what is your process for prepping someone for a media interview?
Well, I always want people to feel comfortable. And preparation and practice is key to that, right? Because I think there's so much fear sometimes around, oh gosh, what if I forget what to say? What if I don't know the answer? And you know this stuff inside and out, typically. You're the expert, right? Like you've literally written the book on it. And so what I like to do is go through 10 questions that typically will be asked in a media interview and go through those and then also think through what are the questions you don't want to be asked. And then let's answer those so that you're ready in case someone asks you that question.
And you're often doing this on Zoom?
So I do. Yes, I do it on Zoom. I give a lot of homework. So I'll say, answer.
They're sort of rehearsing and auditioning right there.
Definitely.
You can see what's working for them and what's not working for them.
It's like practice it with me in this moment. Like, let's work it out and see, are there words that you're overusing or that you're, tripping over? Let's not use that word anymore. Let's tell the story and see how fast you can tell that story. Okay, what if we had less time? And the way that I teach it, I call it the accordion method. So having a short, a medium, and a long answer to any question that you're asked. So that way, in the moment, you sort of know, okay, well, this is they just want something really quick. I got 10 seconds. Here's how I'm going to say it. It's going to be a headline. And then I can go from there. They can ask follow-up questions. But really, having that done in advance, people think, oh, I'll be great. It'll be fine. And then they go on and they blabber on. And they say, I don't even know if I made the point. So you want to avoid that.
Sure. So what are some of the most common mistakes that subject matter experts make in interviews?
Mm-hmm. Well, one is that they go on, they think, oh, I'll just talk. I do this all the time. I'm a professional speaker. It's not the same audience. It's
not
just
at all.
Not. Yeah. And so you need to be as succinct as possible right up at the top. It's like a newspaper article, right? You want to catch them in that headline. And watching television, truly, being able to watch the news and see how they do it. Journalists are so quick, right? They're in and out on these stories in a minute and a half. That's it. They really get to the crux of what they want to say right away. Don't think of it like, oh, I don't want to give it away. Give it away. Give away everything that you have, right? And that's also a misconception is that, oh, if I give away all my best stuff, if I say too much, they won't buy the book. Untrue. Not at all.
Sure. So how can someone prepare for a media appearance without sounding scripted?
Well, that's the thing. A lot of times, especially with writers, they want to write it down, which is fine. You want to write out your thoughts, but the way that we write is not typically the way that we speak. It's very different. Sure. Speaking is much more conversational. You're telling stories. You want to make sure that you're animated, that people like you, that you're smiling at appropriate times. There's a performance to this. And so to be able to practice that is really important. Any media interview that I do, I practice beforehand, always. If it's going to be a television interview, I'm going over and over again. What am I going to say? How am I going to say it? And sometimes it's difficult because you've told the same stories over and over again. So you feel like, oh my gosh, I feel like I'm insane saying this again. But if that audience has not heard it yet, you're almost like a Broadway actor, where it's like, just because you did the matinee doesn't mean you can't really, give it its all in the evening performance. You have to show up with your full self every single time.
So you're saying, of course, that storytelling plays a very big part in effective media communication. People love stories.
It's what they remember.
Absolutely. They remember stories.
Mm-hmm. They connect with stories. They remember you for that. They may not remember your name, right? But they're like, oh yeah, that great story about whatever. And that's what really makes the big impact.
So how can leaders balance expertise with relatability?
It's difficult sometimes because Okay, let's be honest. Maybe you're the smartest person in the room. That's cool, right? It happens a lot. I remember I did a lot of media training and working with scientists who typically were the smartest people in the room, right? But their message...
At least in their area of expertise.
Exactly. Yeah. And depending on who they were talking to. If they were talking to other doctors... different kind of thing. If they're talking to members of the media who have no background in this, and they're trying to sound as important and smart as they are, and we're all just like, no one understands what you're saying. So the key is making your message accessible. And it's not dumbing it down. It's really, truly making it accessible. Because if you're going to be speaking in the media, doing any kind of video or broadcasting, the point is to help people. At least it should be. And so if you're losing people in the message, you're not helping anybody.
So how do you help clients prepare for tough or unexpected questions? Because there's a good chance they'll get some.
It happens, yes. And it's like improv, and that's why it's important to be able to have practiced it already so you don't feel caught off guard. You know what you look like if you're asked a question that you are not ready for. You don't want to look shocked. You want to be prepared for it. So that's part of the training and part of practicing is to make a list. Here we go with the lists again. Make a list of all the questions that you do not want to answer or that you are fearful of.
Right.
So you can jump in and say, okay, if they ask me this, this is what I will say. And, it's the classic, pivot move. You never want to avoid the question completely and be rude or look like you're avoiding it, but you want to move on to something that you do want to talk about.
Sure.
So you can address what they're saying in the best possible way, quickly, fast, and then move on to something else.
And we've both seen really effective media people. They're being interviewed.
Yes.
They answer the unasked question. There's a question they'd like to answer, but it wasn't asked.
Of course.
And they can pivot to that.
As a producer, those were my favorite kinds of guests because I would book somebody and have my intention as a producer to say, these are the topics that I want to make sure that we hit. This is what I think is important to our audience. And then the anchor, even though he had all of my questions, would sometimes not ask those questions or sometimes not lead the conversation in that way.
Right.
And so the guest would know, well, when I talked to Paula before, she really wanted me to mention this. So I'm going to work that in. And those were my favorite people because they were working behind the scenes for me. It made it a richer, better segment. And I would book them again and again because I knew they could control the message in a way.
Sure. So some people are introverts, even leaders of major organizations are introverts. How can they succeed in the media environment today?
Yeah. I mean, you can't change who you are and you shouldn't have to. But the truth is that, the medium itself, you have to meet it where it is. And if that's the best place for your message, then you have to be performative in that way, and show up. There's tons of people who I know who are professional speakers who are introverts and they show up on that stage and they do their thing. And it's like, wow. And then they want to talk to no one. They want to go back to their room and they want to just be done with it. And that's okay. And that's what this is too. It's a performance, right? And so you're going to use up your energy. You're going to do what you're going to do to get that message across, to really lead and to do what you need to do. And then you're going to take your time and you're going to, rebuild your energy sources.
So what are some current trends in media that leaders should be paying attention to?
Video, I've been shouting it from the rooftops for years. Video is not slowing down anytime soon. All of the social media apps love it. It's, algorithms can't get enough of it. So if you can use video in any form, it will really help to get people to notice you and to see you. And plus, we have the tools. You can use your phone for it.
Sure.
Anything. Zoom is so helpful for those types of things. And really just getting it out there and knowing that it doesn't have to be perfect always. I think that's a problem that a lot of people have. Well, I want it to look so polished and the lighting isn't quite right. And, there's a million excuses for why not to do it.
Well, there's something almost charming about imperfection.
Totally.
It's more personal. I mean, I see a lot, and you do too, videos on social media that are in the portrait format rather than landscape.
Right.
I mean, they're obviously doing it on their phone,
Yes.
and that's fine.
Yeah.
It's just like they're letting us kind of in their world
Yep.
a little bit.
And there's different types of videos for different things, right? If you're doing behind the scenes, hey, I'm at the speaking engagement or whatever it is, and like, look,
Sure.
right, that's a different kind of video than if you want to give a message to the team and it's serious. That's going to be a different thing.
Sure. So let's talk about LinkedIn a minute. What makes a LinkedIn profile media ready?
Well, you want to make sure that the person has obviously the credentials, to have been the expert. So you know that they do what they say they do. But also, I think it's important to, when you're looking at a LinkedIn profile, to see that there's evidence that they've done the thing that they want to do for you as a producer or as an editor. So, do they have other media credentials? Have they done this in the past? It's important to see that. And even if it hasn't been, let's say, for a major TV station or whatever, do they have interviews that they've posted there? Are they posting regularly as a thought leader? Or is this just really a static resume? That does sort of show the difference in interest in being an expert, right? So thought leadership, so often, I think you have to have it on LinkedIn. Like, I want to be able to see it. As a producer, I would often go on LinkedIn and see. I remember getting a bunch of stories from people who would just post things that I was like, oh, I didn't know that. That's so interesting. And then I would reach out to them. Not every producer would do that. LinkedIn was never the first stop for other people,
Right.
And now there's so many other social media outlets that you can, be on.
So how do you help clients repurpose content across platforms? There are so many platforms. It seems like a waste to use a good piece of content only once.
100%. Definitely. And you know this. I mean, you do this too, right? You have your podcast that then you turn into articles and I do that too. That comes from the world of television. This is what we did. We would always just first produce the video. And then from there, I would turn that into an article. We would take different sound bites and use it in different ways and, switch it every which way. And it's important because we don't have endless time, but it's nice. You're the only person who can be here right now to do this interview. It's your show, right? So you're using this time to create other assets from it. And it's something that I always tell people, even if you're a fiction author, even if you're nonfiction, whatever it is that you're doing, you can repurpose. You don't have to reinvent the wheel every time. And let's be honest, not everybody's seen it the first time.
Well, sure.
As much as we would love to think they read every last thing that we put out there, it is just not true.
So what is one communication skill that every leader should master?
Listening is one, okay?
For sure.
And that's helpful, I think, in a back and forth type of environment. If you're going to be interviewed, to really listen to the question and see where it's going. Because it might not be the question that you had expected, but it may be a really interesting follow-up question. And so you don't want to miss the opportunity to maybe tell a really cool story or something that would be really impactful in that moment because you weren't listening and you were just sort of like, oh, well, this was the talking point I wanted to talk about. And then you just sort of do that. So I think listening is a really important one. But I think the most important one is being succinct.
Excellent. I'm pondering that because I'm thinking of so many people I see on the media who haven't talked with Paula Rizzo. Let's put it that way. So I hope they'll seek you out. Well, Paula, thank you so much for joining us on Leadership. This conversation is a reminder that many of us have a truckload of things we'd like to accomplish, but we're challenged with the task of deciding exactly how to invest our finite resources of time, attention, and energy. Paula has given us some smart, battle-tested advice on how to manage these finite resources. In a world of noise and distraction, strategic list-making offers clarity, intention, and calm. Whether you're building a media presence or simply trying to breathe easier, the right list can be your compass. To learn more about Paula and her work, visit her website at Paula Rizzo. That's Paula, RIZZO.com. If you found this episode valuable, please share it with your team, your network, or anyone else who's ready to lead with more confidence, more courage, and more impact. And be sure to leave a review of our podcast. Every single sentence fuels the algorithms that promote the great content we have on Leadership. And for free resources to help you in your leadership journey, go to leadershop.net. That's leadershop.net. Thanks again for joining us. Until next time, stay safe, be happy, and spread good cheer wherever you go. For Leadership, I'm Roger Dean Duncan.